Good afternoon and welcome to yet another episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. So last week we finished our episode discussing the career of Solomon Schechter and his relationship to the Sisters of Sinai, how they worked together to bring to light the vast trove of documents found in the Cairo Geniza. Today we look at a contemporary of both Schechter and the sisters, that being James Rendel Harris. Harris belongs to that august company of 19th century manuscript hunters. Many of these men and women knew each other personally or knew of each other's work. And this list includes, but is not limited to, Robert Curzon, Constantine von Tischendorf, Agnes Smith Lewis, and Margaret Dunlop Gibson, both the Sisters of Sinai, and of course, J. Rendel Harris, subject for today, Solomon Schechter, Grenfell and Hunt, two British explorers that we will be covering very, very soon, F.C. Burkett, Dr. Robert Bensley, and many, many more. These men and women lived in exciting times during those decades for biblical manuscript and archaeological discoveries. Let's begin with an overall summary of Rendel Harris' life and achievements. James Rendel Harris was born January 27, 1852 in Plymouth, England, and he died on March 1, 1941. He lived a long, exciting, and very fruitful life. He was an English biblical scholar and curator of manuscripts who was instrumental in bringing to light many ancient Syriac scriptures and other early documents. His contacts at St. Catherine's Monastery on Mount Sinai enabled the Sisters of Sinai to discover the Syriac palimpsest, the oldest Syriac New Testament document in existence at that time. He later accompanied the sisters on a second trip with Drs. Robert Bensley and F.C. Burkett to decipher the palimpsest. And while at the monastery, Harris discovered other manuscripts, including a Syriac text of the Apology of Aristides, a document that had been lost to the world. In addition, Harris and his wife intervened to assist refugees of Armenia who were undergoing persecution at the hands of the Ottoman government. These were the early days of what is known as the Armenian Genocide. Now let's take a little closer look at the man Rendel Harris before we zero in on a couple of key aspects of his work. Harris was born to a Congregationalist family and grew up as one of 11 children. His father, Henry Marmaduke Harris, was a house decorator, and his mother, Elizabeth Corker Harris, ran a shop selling baby clothes. He was educated first at Plymouth Grammar School and then Clare College, Cambridge, and his early interest in mathematics enabled him to achieve third Wrangler in the mathematical tripos of 1874. At Cambridge, a Wrangler is a student who gains honors in the mathematical tripos competition, and the competition was the distinctive written examination of undergraduate students. The highest scoring student is the senior Wrangler, the second highest is the second Wrangler, and so on. Harris was awarded the wooden spoon, a Cambridge tradition, for placing third. But after graduation in 1875, Rendel became a tutor in mathematics at Clare College, but during the undergraduate years, he began Greek textual studies with F.J.A. Hort, the renowned Cambridge New Testament textual critic, under whose influence his interest turned away from mathematics toward New Testament Greek studies. It was Hort who, along with B.F. Westcott and team, produced the revised version of 1870, a New Testament Greek text based on newer manuscripts that were available to translators of the King James Bible. At Clare College, he became the college librarian, spending time organizing and cataloging the library contents. It was here he began to read manuscripts with enthusiasm and increasing skill. In 1880, he married a Quaker, also from Plymouth, Helen Balkwill, who was 11 years his senior, and under her influence and that of the evangelical revival of the 1870s, he became a lifelong member of the Society of Friends in 1885. The couple moved to the United States in 1882, where he was appointed professor of New Testament Greek at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And while on leave from his post in 1884, Rendel carried out a survey of manuscript sources in Cambridge, in London, and in European libraries, and he began to fully realize the significance of original manuscript sources for his research. This idea became the impetus behind his own expeditions to the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East, which he carried out over a period of 35 years. In 1885, Harris resigned his post at Johns Hopkins as he was opposed to vivisection practiced in their laboratories. So the couple returned to Britain for just a short while, as Harris was soon appointed professor in biblical studies at Haverford College, a Quaker institution near Philadelphia. And for 6 years he taught biblical language and church history there. From 1888 to 1889, while on leave from Haverford, he traveled to Lebanon, Palestine, and Egypt, purchasing 47 rolls and codices written in Hebrew, Latin, Arabic, Syriac, Armenian, and Ethiopic. During his time in Jerusalem, he made friends with the Greek Orthodox Patriarch, and after 6 weeks of research, he discovered an early Christian Greek text, the Acts of the Martyrdom of Perpetua and Felicitas. This work, already known in Latin, tells the story of 2 women martyrs imprisoned and devoured by wild beasts in Carthage in 203 AD. During this journey, he also discovered the Syriac version of the Apology of Aristides in the monastery of St. Catherine. This work describes a defense of the Christian faith before the Emperor Antoninus Pius, who reigned from 138 to 161 AD. Upon his return, he donated the manuscripts he had collected to Haverford. They're still held by the college library. In 1903, he was appointed the first director of studies at the Society of Friends New College at Woodbrook, near Birmingham. In accepting this post, he turned down a very enticing offer as professor of theology at Leiden University. However, students from Leiden attended his courses at Woodbrook, and the university later awarded him a doctorate. Harris represented 2 prestigious libraries during his lifetime: Johns Hopkins Library and John Rylands Library in Manchester, where he became the curator of manuscripts. Most of his publications dealt with biblical and patristic history. Among the topics on which he wrote are the Apology of Aristides, the Didache, Philo, the Diatessaron, the Christian Apologists, the Acts of Perpetua and Felicitas, the Odes and Psalms of Solomon, the Gospel of Peter, and other Western and Syriac texts, and numerous works on various biblical manuscripts. In 1993, a Festschrift was published in his honor on the occasion of his 80th birthday. A new and quite comprehensive biography of Harris was published in 2018 by Alessandro Falcetta, entitled The Daily Discoveries of a Bible Scholar and Manuscript Hunter, a biography of James Rendel Harris. Its main text is 486 pages, not including addenda of almost another 200 pages, and I am indebted to this work for much material in this episode. Archives of James Rendel Harris are held at the Cadbury Research Library at the University of Birmingham. I would like now to concentrate on 2 of Rendel's important contributions to New Testament studies. His contributions are many, but we must confine ourselves to these 2. Number 1, the discovery of the Apology of Aristides, and secondly, his contribution to finding the Syriac palimpsest of the Gospels at St. Catherine's. Lastly, we'll discuss his later years, humanitarian efforts, and overall significance for New Testament scholarship. First, the discovery of the Apology of Aristides. In the summer of 1888, Haverford College granted Harris 1 year's leave of absence to travel to the Middle East and photograph manuscripts that would be returned and kept by the college. Harris was among the first to travel with a camera on all his expeditions. He had encouraged the Sisters of Sinai to do so, and had in fact trained them to use the camera and loaned them his personal camera on some of their trips. Rendel and his wife Helen left in the summer of 1888, and their first stop was London, where Harris spent time in the British Museum. They then traveled to Liverpool, where they boarded the SS Ararat. The ship made stops at Lisbon, Algiers, Malta, and its final destination at Alexandria on September 22, 1888. There they caught an express train to Cairo and prepared for their further travels to Lebanon, Palestine, and back eventually to the Sinai. In Beirut, Harris made an important friend in Frederick Jones Bliss, who would become one of the leading archaeologists in the region. Bliss accompanied Harris to the Sinai, and they arrived at the monastery of St. Catherine in the winter of 1889. It was March 13th when they reached the monastery. Harris carried a letter of introduction from Patriarch Nicodemus and had the advantage of speaking Greek, which was always welcomed by the monks, something Tischendorf and other earlier explorers did not possess. After a few days, Harris asked to see the older manuscripts, and he was shown a storage room of large chests filled with ancient Greek manuscripts. He took between 300 and 400 photographs of them with his camera, fitted with a recent invention, the Eastman Walker roll holder. The librarian's name was Galaction, and he became friends with Harris and gladly assisted him with all of his requests. Harris distinguished himself in another way, namely his interest in non-Greek manuscripts, in particular Syriac. Galaction eventually guided him to a dark room below the library and adjacent to the Archbishop's quarters. In that room were 12 boxes full of manuscripts and a closet. Galaction opened the closet and showed Harris 2 little chests of manuscripts that could only be seen by candlelight. Rendel picked up a Syriac manuscript and brought it out into the daylight. The manuscript contained numerous works and appeared to be dated to the 7th century. While looking at the text of one of the leaves, he read these words, quote, "Again, the apology which Aristides the philosopher made before Hadrian the king concerning the worship of God." Harris had just recovered one more piece of a vanquished Christian library. He held in his hands the Syriac version of the hitherto lost Apology of Aristides. In the middle of the 2nd century AD, the Athenian Christian philosopher Aristides wrote a defense of the Christian faith to convince the Emperor Antoninus Pius of the superiority of the Christian worldview. At the time, Christians and Jews were being separated into 2 distinct religions, but only Jews had legal protection in the empire. Christian intellectuals were hoping to persuade the authorities of the legitimacy of their faith and receive similar protection. Eusebius and Jerome mentioned this work, but only the first 2 chapters of it were available at the time from a recently discovered Armenian manuscript, and its authenticity was questioned. But Harris's discovery put an end to the debate. He was the first Westerner to read it in its entirety. The Apology of Aristides is a fascinating look into the earliest years of Christianity in the hostile Roman Empire. Now, I've left a link for it for you in the description box below. And this brings us to his second contribution, his involvement in finding the Syriac palimpsest of the Gospels at St. Catherine's Monastery. We covered this story from the sister's point of view in a previous episode, but we will quickly recap it here with more attention to Harris. While in that dark room where Harris discovered the Apology of Aristides lay many other old Syriac manuscripts that he did not have time to analyze. We're now back in Cambridge in 1891 when Helen Harris, Rendel's wife, had a chance meeting with Agnes Smith Lewis, whose recently deceased husband was the librarian of Corpus Christi College and a friend of Rendel Harris. Agnes knew of Harris's discovery of the Apology and told Helen she was learning Syriac in preparation for a trip to Sinai. And upon learning this, Rendel called Agnes at once. He confided to her that he'd held back a secret from his trip to the monastery. He told him that there were 2 chests of ancient Syriac manuscripts in that dark closet, and he was convinced there were still valuable documents there that have not yet been uncovered and analyzed. He taught the sisters how to use his camera. He provided them with one along with the stand for easier photographing. And so the sisters traveled and arrived at the monastery on February 6th and were welcomed by the monks. They were shown that dark closet and the chest with the manuscripts. Agnes, who of the 2 could read Syriac, soon observed a book that turned out to be a palimpsest of the Gospels. It was soon to be known as the oldest surviving copy of the Gospels, older than any other Greek manuscript of the Gospels then known. Well, these are just a couple of Harris's contributions to the field of New Testament scholarship. Were it not for Harris's letting the sisters know about that dark closet with those manuscripts, we may have never known of the Syriac palimpsests of the Gospels. But for lack of time, we could cover the discovery of the Odes of Solomon that Harris made. The Odes of Solomon, or the Psalms of Solomon, is an ancient collection of Christian hymns, likely composed in the late 1st or early 2nd century. The text is considered one of the earliest pieces of Christian devotional poetry and provides insights into early Christian theology and worship. Harris was also instrumental in providing and promoting critical approaches to the New Testament text. He supported methods of analyzing variations across manuscripts to identify early readings and textual changes. His approach helped establish a foundation for later scholars in developing the field of textual criticism. While not exclusively focused on the New Testament, Harris was also a mentor to Alphonse Mangana, an Assyrian scholar and collector, and Mangana was pivotal in developing his collection, an extensive collection of Middle Eastern manuscripts, which included many early Christian and Islamic texts, and it's been invaluable for scholars studying the origins of both the New Testament and early Christian writings. We must not forget how Harris and his wife Helen were deeply involved in humanitarian efforts during the Armenian genocide of 1915 through 1917, when the Ottoman Turkish government initiated a systematic campaign of forced deportations and mass killings against the Armenian Christian population. The Harrises, who were committed Quakers and active in social justice, felt a strong moral and religious obligation to aid the persecuted Armenians. They personally delivered aid to families affected by this crisis. Beyond direct relief efforts, the Harrises actively raised funds and campaigned to garner public and government support for the Armenian refugees. Rendel Harris used his academic and public platforms to speak out about the crisis, urging others to contribute to relief. His personal writings and speeches documented the horrors faced by the Armenians, which included mass deportations, starvations, and violence. In 1897, he published Letters of the Scenes of the Recent Massacres in Armenia, which detailed firsthand the account of atrocities committed against Armenians during the late 19th century, particularly around the 1894 through 1896 Hamidian massacres. Through these accounts, he brought much-needed international attention to the plight of these Armenians and inspired further humanitarian action. Harris lived a long life, which saw him through the First World War and into the beginning of the Second. J. Rendel Harris was an extremely lucky man. And when I say extremely lucky man, I mean it. He survived not one, not two, not three, but 4 German submarine attacks during World War I. While traveling by ship on relief and academic missions, Harris faced near-death experiences at sea due to the wartime threat of German U-boats, which targeted both military and civilians. In the first incident, in August 1915, Harris was aboard the SS Arabic, a British passenger liner traveling to the United States. The ship was en route when it was struck by a German U-boat off the coast of Ireland. The attack was sudden, and the Arabic sank within minutes. Harris managed to survive by quickly boarding a lifeboat, where he and other passengers were eventually rescued by nearby vessels. Only a year later, in March 1916, Harris was traveling again, this time on the SS Sussex, a cross-channel ferry between England and France. The Sussex was torpedoed by another German submarine while carrying passengers across the English Channel. The explosion was devastating and many passengers were killed or severely injured. Harris, however, survived the attack once again, enduring the chaos and finding his way to safety amid the destruction. In November 1916, Harris was aboard the ship the City of Birmingham when it was struck by a German U-boat torpedo near Malta while en route from England to India via the Mediterranean. The attack left the ship severely damaged and passengers, including Harris, were forced to evacuate. The passengers were rescued by a steamer after 3.5 hours in the sea and brought safely to Alexandria. In March 1917, while Harris was traveling for his humanitarian work aboard the ship, the City of Paris, his ship was struck by torpedoes from another German U-boat, leading to chaos as passengers and crew scrambled for lifeboats amid the sinking vessel. Harris, already known for his remarkable survival from the earlier attacks, faced another close call. Once again, he managed to survive, escaping to safety despite the dangers of hypothermia, panic, and the threat of further attacks from submarines in the area. Well, I hope you can see, if nothing else, James Rendel Harris lived an exciting and profitable life. Much, much more could be said about this man, his travels, his discoveries, his contributions to many fields of learning. Let's wrap it up by saying that Harris's work had lasting impact on New Testament studies, especially through his dedication to manuscript discovery, Syriac scholarship, and rigorous methods of textual criticism. His work continues to serve as a foundation for scholars in these areas. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the League of Biblical Enthusiasts. And if you do, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. I am providing links in the description box about many of the material discussed in this episode that you can chase down for further research. Next week, we continue our survey of more manuscript hunters. So, stay tuned. Be well, and thanks for listening to this episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts.